Thank you for coming here. This is the fourth time that this talk has been given at a pop-up city, and it keeps evolving because the tools keep changing so much that almost everything from the first talk is now out of this presentation in the last year, which is like, the speed of change is super high, and I think it's really important for us to share the techniques that work for people that are doing this. And so I'm really excited to hear kind of in the second half of this talk what people in the room are doing and what successes folks have had. And we'll start out kind of overviewing a little bit of my approach using blueprint-driven development and some notes that I've made in the process of working with large language models. This is like not necessarily a beginner-friendly class. If you're a vibe coder, you can definitely learn from a lot of these techniques, but we're kind of targeting folks that are already familiar with what an IDE is, with what Git is, that kind of thing. I think you could totally figure it out, and ChatGPT could probably get you up to speed while I'm talking at this point anyway. So, real quick, show of hands, who here considers themselves at least 50% of the time a software developer? Just so I can see where we're at here. And super cool, and glad for folks that our hands are down and up. Who here is using Cursor or Windsurf or maybe VS Code with a bunch of LLM plugins as their primary IDE? It's actually much more interesting who doesn't have their hand up on that one. Cool. So we've got a lot of folks there. That's really great. And it's like also very exciting to see that change. Even whenever I did this exact same talk at Lana, there was a way less percentage of folks in Cursor, so we're seeing that change.
How long ago was that?
That was 6 months ago. Okay. Yeah. And so how about, who here is using an MCP as part of their kind of primary development process of any MCP?
What's that?
We'll get to that. Okay, super interesting. Yeah, it's actually pretty fascinating. Okay, so enough of the context stuff. I'm Atin. I'm a senior software developer. I'm also a founder of Authentic, which is a social media app. You're going to hear more about that later. And I'm using large language models super heavily. I feel like kind of towards the forefront of using AI-assisted coding development in the last year or so. It's been really exciting to see the space evolve super quickly. So what we're going to talk through first is kind of my more formal framework that I think applies really well across a lot of these tools. I'm going to be demoing in Cursor, but like all of this will translate one-to-one into Windsurf or VS Code, etc., depending on what you're comfortable with. The main approach that I use when making a new project is something that is blueprint-driven development. And so I'm going to be talking about Authentic, but this applies across the board. What this means is that this is like I just had this run, 50,000 line project, and these are the only things that are really intended for human eyes to see. This docs folder is where I'm writing out my documentation at an extremely high level of fidelity. And so writing excellent docs is so critical, and maintaining your docs is so critical to give large language models a framework in terms of what your code structure is. Now, what do I mean when I say writing docs? When I'm saying this, like let's pick one, profile photo handling. So for this, before I wrote any code in this entire project, I sit down and am having an extensive conversation with large language models about all the details. So in this instance, this is profile photo handling. So I might say, okay, I need a document describing profile photo handling. And have, you're a senior software architect and you're laying out a product requirement description using Next.js as a PWA app. And I'll probably pass in other documentation along with that request that gives it more context in terms of what the app is. And then it's going to say, okay, here's a doc. And then I take that doc and you keep doing this loop of, I want you to, so I would take that output, I would put it into a new thread, I would say, here's a PRD that we're working with. I need you to name 20 issues or potential problems or things that I should be aware of that are not covered in this doc. Number them, give them to me. That comes back. I say, okay, I want you to propose solutions for 7, 16, and 20, and you keep iterating on this until you get an extremely high-level doc that's really already been scanned extensively by different large language models, right? I'm jumping between primarily O3, at this point, like Claude 4 and Grok 3.5 to really give us a good different perspectives on the issue. Multi-tabbing, doing this kind of thing. And I'm doing this for like 40 or 50 hours before this project had a single line of code written, which is a really huge change from being like a code-first development attitude. Of before it would be like, build out a chunk of functionality, add something in, do this kind of thing. Here it's really like, this is a huge advantage, okay? So then once you've got this, what I'm calling like, this really refined doc, you can see like, let's talk like a really handy one here, database architecture, where a really detailed description of every field in the database, exactly what you're going to use. Yeah, yeah.
Blow it up a bit?
Yeah, let's boost up our font size here. The contrast isn't the best on this. Somewhat readable? Cool. So the words themselves, I will also say, about 6 months ago, I switched to using Markdown for this. The current generation of large language models, previous generations, 3.5 and previous, preferred XML. They needed to know when a section stopped. Now that's gone. We don't need to worry about this. Let's optimize for humans. Let's use Markdown files. I'm using Markdown files super extensively. An important point in this is how you're hooking your documentation into your large language model calls, right? And so for that, who here has set custom cursor rules or the windsurf equivalent? Okay, cool. Yeah, obviously incredibly powerful. And like, I spend more time of my human time refining my cursor rules than any other single file in this entire project, right? Because that is a force multiplier on every single, not just prompt that I write, but then every single tool call that the LLM writes from there, right? And I'm there are days where I'm having over 1,000 prompts in a day. So like you work out that math, really dialing in that cursor rules is huge. It is worth your time. Yeah.
How long have you found is the optimal length for cursor rule documentation?
Yeah, so this is super interesting. I will briefly say that like by learning, you have something on this point?
No.
Okay, yeah. So by looking at the system prompts from large language, from like the system prompt of ChatGPT and Claude, you can actually look how they've expanded dramatically, right, as context length has gotten larger. When I started out, I would really emphasize brevity and really be like 100 lines, 200 lines. Now I think that's way less of an issue. And now I worry more about just like tokens that are not on the optimum vector. So it's like, it's much more flexible in terms of length. Still, I also have changed my approach there because you don't need a prompt for something that the model already knows. And it used to be you really had to handhold the model into a lot of these techniques. Now the base models have a lot of things that we used to have to tell the model to do. And so that I try and avoid like anything that I feel like is heavy overlap and focus in on specific things for my specific project, right? So I'm gonna pull up cursor rules file here. This is like a heavily mutated cursor rules. There's GitHubs out there that have like huge selections of cursor rules that is very useful. Like this is going to be, some of this is going to be very handy across projects, but most of it is specific to a Next.js PWA app, right? I will just briefly see like this kind of stuff, super handy. Also the phrase follow best practices is like ketchup. It's good on every prompt. Like even though it's in my cursor rules multiple times, I still throw it in. Like it's follow best practices just keeps you bumping onto that vector of like professional software output. Yeah.
Is there one or two cursor rules or system instructions that you especially recommend?
Yeah, so I was going to talk about this later, but I think it's directly relevant to this. So I really like, I have a 2-role dichotomy in my cursor rules here. I have a senior software architect role, and I have a senior software development role. This is probably the single, like, one of the best hacks that I've come across, or at least it's not even a hack. You're going to see other people talk about this on Reddit. But let's say I hit a bug, complicated issue. It's not like an obvious syntax thing. I say, okay, let's solve this as a software architect. This cursor rule says, okay, when asked as a software architect, specifically means an experienced Next.js senior staff architect who only provides high-level guidance, suggestions of root cause, and strategic ideas. A software architect never writes code directly, but instead offers architectural direction, design, etc., etc. This is super useful, right? What you're saying to the LLM is stop trying to fix the problem with code, bump out of that vector, and move entirely into solving what the root cause is. And then once you're in that mode, I'll have a whole conversation, here's this observed behavior. Users are seeing photos load super slow on iOS, but Android works great. As a software architect, let's get to the root of the issue. Have a whole conversation, right? Oftentimes there's a variety of back and forth. There's like trying different strategies. And at the end, and this is also a big takeaway from this approach, once I feel like a large language model has a general understanding of the issue, regardless of if I have an understanding of the issue or not, then I say, great work, make a note. The other folder that is super handy in here is my notes folder. This is like a scratch pad kind of transitory area for the large language model. And so you've had this whole context thread, right, of like a long discussion of debugging a complicated issue. Then you say, hey, go make a note with the outcome, and it cleans it up, makes a really tight professional looking document that says, oh, okay, here's the files we want to change, here's what we think is the root cause. It still has yet to think about actually writing the code. It's still in this debug mode. And then I create a new thread, and I move into the other role of the software developer. And so then I can start a new thread, and my context window isn't dirtied up with 100,000 very similar tokens that are either failed approaches or talking about the bad code. You want that out of the context window. By having this note as a clear handoff from like understanding the issue and solving the issue, you really boost your accuracy in terms of how effectively you can deal with that. Saves you tokens, which for a working software developer in this day and age, I feel like doesn't even matter at this point, but definitely gives you a better accuracy in terms of what those responses look like. I'll also just briefly say, this is actually something I've been experimenting with, is literally having this stop trigger for the software architect. This is more experimental, like I think it works reasonably well most of the time, where it literally will say, oh, I'm not going to write any code. I'm gonna stop. I only provide guidance. Would you like to switch to developer to move into implementation? Your mileage may vary. Yeah.
Just a question. Earlier you mentioned that you write thousands long code. Is there some way you keep metrics on what's happening with yourself?
I literally just upgraded myself to a business on the Cursor thing, and then that way I use their billing page. And it's like $20 extra a month, so I have extra stats on my developer productivity, their billing page is also for the non-business pages, can be super annoying. Yeah.
You also mentioned that before you start all this, like you talk to LLMs, and then you make the plan, and then you go to execution. So I just want to know this workflow. For me, how it works. I use ChatGPT a lot, so I try to make the prompts to use the cursor with ChatGPT. This is how I communicate. But how does this work for you?
I mean, for me, I mainly live inside of Cursor, but whenever doing early documentation, I think it doesn't really matter. The goal is to make, you can ask for a PRD, a product requirement document, because then that knocks, if you want a more corporate-y kind of a thing, or you can, you want just that document is the output. So you can use whatever tools you want to get to that document, and whatever methodology is familiar with you. I would just encourage, in whatever way you're using, iterating on it. Don't just take the first thing that comes out, but say, go find the issues with this, go find 10 improvements with this, and like cycling on it. Ultimately, you just want to get the file inside of this docs folder, and then that way it's there, so whenever you move into implementation. So that's actually a good bridge to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is, okay, so once you've got this really refined documents folder, there's a few approaches here for how you want to start scaffolding out the actual code of the project. This is assuming a brand new project, obviously. I would just briefly say, if you're working on an existing code base, this is still worth it, but just go have the agent inside of Cursor be like, go write documentation for this project, and like at a very high level of detail, and create document files. It is obviously easier if you're doing a full, kind of blue ocean development, right? Once you've got the docs, Then I say, okay, I hop over into Cursor, I load up whatever agent I want, and I say, hey, I need you to make a implementation plan for this project. Start at a high level, put it into the notes folder. You know, high level implementation plan.md. Go do your thing. It goes and creates that. I then do that same iterative process of saying, okay, here's our implementation plan. You've got these docs, you've got an implementation plan. Review the implementation plan with your understanding of these frameworks and upgrade our, find the issues with the implementation plan. And keep this iterative process going. And then once you've got an implementation plan that you really like, you can keep that at a high level of break this project up into phases is something that I've had good success with. And then I say, okay, time to move into phase one. I want you to go build phase one right now as a senior software engineer. And that's when the magic happens. You're doing all this scaffolding work. So that way, whenever you kick off that one specific prompt, it has documentation that it knows how to read, it knows exactly the scope of what it's trying to implement, and it can just go off to the races. And what happens then is you're getting something that is extremely well documented, that is very well scoped, and that it's effectively written by a large language model for a large language model, right? And what I really love is on the implementation plan, I'll say what's phase one here? And it'll say here's phase one. It'll take your team 14 days to do. 20 minutes later, it's done, and it's perfect, and it's running in my browser, and it's very, very exciting. And so I genuinely think it's 100x speed up kind of a situation, which is pretty bonkers. Yeah, question?
Sorry, I came in a little late and I missed what seems to be a very critical step, which is getting that documentation generated. Can you just give a very quick
Very briefly, it's just you want to have a really excellent level of documentation before you move into touching any code.
Yeah, but how do you get the cursor to do that for you, or do you?
It's a conversation you have with whatever tool is comfortable for you. But the goal is just to have a really, really excellent documentation. And again, reiterating it, this is going to improve if you're working on an existing code base, even at an enterprise scale. You still want to do this, right? Because this building out documentation for existing code, these things are so fucking good at, right? Mm-hmm. And I've also, I'll leave it at that for now. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you're iterating upon the plan and then changing rules with it, you mentioned you use different LLMs on O3, Cloud 4, Cloud 3.5, I think it was.
Yeah.
How do you choose which model is better at which thing, what perspectives?
Yeah.
Do each one on the table for you?
So there's a few things there. I think, first off, if you're working as a software developer, for me, especially if I'm doing client work, I'm putting this thing on Claude 4, max mode, leave it there, prompt. I don't even want to waste the cognitive overhead on making that decision. I'd rather spend an extra 25 cents a query and increase my accuracy and productivity by 15% than I am to even think about what to select on the model dropdown. But there's lots of different levels there, and I think that's up to you. I also know, I know people talk about the Google 2.5 model and also 4 mini. I'm told they're really great. For me, they're other people in the room. They're not my friends. Claude's my friend, O3 is my friend. We know how to talk to each other, and I haven't switched over yet. So it's and I also feel all of these things are pretty close. If you're using these sorts of methodologies, I don't think you need to rely too much on the subtle differences in between current generational models. I would just say being in the current, most recent state-of-the-art generation, it pays off well. Did I see another question or? Okay, cool. So that's docs. We talked on this. I could post this as well. It is also interesting, you learn, this is what I should say. It's also really important for your cursor rules to reference the documentation folder. And this is actually a little out of date, and tell it, hey, these are some key files. And hey, make sure that your cursor rules is giving the understanding of where your documentation is to the agent. So that way, the first time I ask a question, you'll see it be this touches on, this bug relates to the database. I'm gonna go read the database documentation, bam. And this database documentation, I think it's substantial, right? It's over 1,000 lines, right? And then at there's some discussion. So at first it's a very high level schema. It's talking through, it's talking through a lot of the specifics. It's giving examples into common queries that are used. And then it's, talking about migrations. Here, there's actually some notes from it for it about migrations to the schema, which is kind of helpful if you do a migration, but like maybe you've got like a large scale enterprise software or something, large code base where a migration might have downstream impacts that are hard to suss out on your machine. It's really helpful, so it's like, oh, I'm getting this bug. Oh, I know what change just happened. This change just happened. We just did this migration. We just changed this from it into a float. I wonder if that's what's causing this issue. Just really pushing on context. And you also can do these one-off rules as well. I'll talk about Taskmaster in a second. There's two fun things to talk through here. First off, I really like using this one main cursor rules, and I don't really break these off very much. I will say there's a few interesting MCPs that are out there, and I don't use any of them. And I was expecting some people here to be using them, so it's like very interesting that like MCPs are getting a lot of talk, but I feel like they're not quite there. A particularly interesting one that's making a lot of waves right now is Taskmaster. It's quite good. I think it's optimized a little bit more for Windsurf, but like it works within Cursor. It really does this process of breaking a large-scale task up into subtasks, and then it has this whole internal structure for like how you keep track of it. You don't need to worry about something. So you can say like, I want this app, and it breaks it up in all these little subtasks, and then figures out which tasks are parallelizable, and then fires them off into an agent, and just like lets you know when it's done. It is conceptually very slick. It is, I would suspect, the future of where we are going. That future is like maybe still one more model step away from like actually being super useful right now. I think for me, I end up having better luck with just using my existing process and sequence. I think if you were doing a brand new project today with Claude 4, I would think about, hey, poke around on Taskmaster, it might be interesting. Taskmaster is one of those MCPs where like you kind of need to go do it the Taskmaster way if you do it that way. But I know that there are friends of mine, professional devs, who are getting good results with Taskmaster, and I think that's unique amongst a lot of the MCPs. I also think like I would urge high level of security caution around MCPs as well. Like it's very sexy, but you're like blasting your data around in ways that there's like a lot of vulnerabilities. Maybe for a personal project, that's totally fine, but like if you're getting paid to do client work or you're dealing with API keys or whatever, I'd say I would exercise a little bit of caution there. So also, this is just me critiquing the Cursor design team. How many people here know that you can have 3 tabs open talking to large language models in Cursor?
You taught me.
Yeah, okay, you don't count that. Okay, so this is like the easiest upgrade. It is so hidden, it is like devious. If you click Option and hit Tab here, you get to have a new chat channel which has its own context. It is so handy. It is insane that they make this like hidden tooltip be the only way to discover, for me, what is like a core way I interact as a professional with my tools. So I always have 3 tabs open 100% of the time. And when I'm like in the zone, I'm gonna have 3 different conversations going with 3 different instances of Claude 4 simultaneously. And Cursor will give you a little ding whenever a chat's done. And my job as a human is jumping in between these 3 tabs and just like kind of keeping an eye on what's going on. And then there's a skill right now, this won't matter in 6 months, I think, of knowing what sort of task you can kick off in each chat channel such that they don't interfere with each other. They do have some like minimal level of like conflict resolution where like if they see one chat editing it, they will pause and wait for that. But like I normally have like a bug fix going on one, and then like new feature development on some completely separate part of the app on another, and like the third is kind of like a miscellaneous one-shot quick stuff. But like that's very much worth doing. Also like, who here talks to their computer? Okay, this is like a no-brainer. It's like a better way to interact with technology.
Does that include yelling and profanity?
So I just want to demonstrate how incredibly easy using voice to text is. This is how I am not typing most of my prompts, okay? I am using this all the time. It is super fast, it works offline, it's a local model. Yeah, this is called Super Whisper. I'm a big fan. There's other things that do similar things. Super Whisper for me is great because I'm using it as a local model, so I can do this on an airplane, I can do this offline, I can do it with private information, it doesn't leave my machine. And it works anywhere, right? I'm using it to write text messages. I used it to write the description for this class. Like, it is faster than typing, and I like take typing reasonably seriously, but I can talk way faster. And so that's a huge upgrade for sure. Yeah, question?
The cognitive scientist in me is always wondering about this, so I'm just going to take this opportunity.
Yeah.
Like, you had to presumably learn how to get into the minds of talking about your code, though, right? Like, you like probably learned to type. Like, that's the way that you took your concepts and got them into, like, you know.
Are you talking about specifically the physical action of typing?
Yeah, I'm saying, like, when you started speaking, you probably had to do a lot of practice to get up to speed in terms of how you vocalize the things that you're.
I would say not nearly as much. I think like there is a thing of that. Like you can, the thing is large language models, I should say this, they bridge that so easily. You know what I mean? So like, I might say like or like or whatever that I would never type out. And if we were actually writing code, that would be a huge deal breaker. But a large language model can abstract away that. Same with like typos and stuff. Like I'm not fixing my typos, right? Like just like fire and forget. And like unless it's like a variable name or a function name, like the thing is just like productivity. And if something goes wrong, I click checkpoint. I also just want to briefly touch on, I'll get to the question in a second. Wanted to briefly say, obviously, I imagine people are familiar with Git in this room, but like obviously good Git practice is huge. You know, having regular Git commits is so critical because like I'm in YOLO mode, this thing is running commands on my code base. Oftentimes I'm not looking at closely what they're doing unless it's like a particularly sticky issue. So you want to be regularly having really good Git hygiene, right? Like, you know, as a developer in the olden days, I would do like, 2 Git commits a day or something, right? And now I'm easily doing 20 Git commits a day because I want to, anytime I get something done, I want to be saving that progress because I'm making these wide-ranging changes. An agent might change 5 files, and if you can't roll back, it's like soul-crushing. It can be like super gnarly. Like it is much better, it is 100 times better to roll back than it is to try and prompt your way out of a prompt spaghetti mess you already prompted yourself into. And so what's a great way to make using Git more interesting? I find this like philosophically super interesting. You know what I'm going to talk about here. I should introduce Git Gandalf. So you can make these custom agents in Cursor by going into Add Custom Mode. You can go to Advanced Options. You give them a custom instruction. Hey Git Gandalf, I want you to say hi to a crowd and then do a Git commit. So Git Gandalf's system prompt says basically you respond entirely in the voice of Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. And anytime you successfully push to the dev branch or prod branch, you celebrate with an epic poem related to the contents of the files you just pushed up. Super great. This is like a goofy thing we did on Copenhagen at another community we run called Island Act. And I like love it in a way that like is somewhat irrational. It is super satisfying. And like this is like an extra Gandalf-y one because I gave it context for it. But it's like, I can't tell you how satisfying it is to push to prod, having it pass all your build tests, having it pass the TypeScript, checks and the linter, and then like getting this like ridiculous poem from Gandalf about like your success in terms of like getting code done. And like, obviously this can go all sorts of ways, but I think it gets into kind of a larger thing about like how we interact with these models. I feel like my like higher self in the future deeply appreciates this sort of interaction. There's like some interesting Tulpamancy kind of cyber vibes from all of this. And you can go pretty far on it. I would say though that like I like this because Git is a nice chunk. I would be a little more hesitant to do this on my like day in, day out prompts because like it's a vector. I mean, maybe it works. And like, especially if you picked like Spock from Star Trek, I bet it would probably like be very much not detrimental to the quality of tokens. But if you picked like, I don't know, Han Solo, I bet it probably wouldn't be as accurate, right? Like you get, and like, do I want to think about that? No. So like I keep my normal stock interactions with the large language model as it is. But I think there's a lot of stuff to play around with here, and also I suspect whenever this talk happens in a year, this is going to be more of a thing. Yeah, I'll keep my future. Sorry, I know there's a couple questions.
It was just a comment about like how you can think out loud when you're vibe coding with the
Mhm.
voice. Like I think I'm often like I record for like 1 minute. I'm just like thinking half the time, and yeah, it's pretty cool. So
Definitely. And I learned the super whisper thing through this, right? And like seeing, also like it's not natural to use your computer in a new way. And so really, I feel like I had to watch people talk to their computer before I started even taking it seriously. And then when I did do it, it would be like when I was like alone in my room because it felt so weird. And now you'll see me in the co-working thing, just like talking pretty heavily to the machine. This is such an upgrade to how we interact with technology. It requires no additional hardware, and it is effectively free. Like, again, it is like a definite force multiplier. Yeah.
Do you allow arbitrary terminal commands, or is there a way to put limits on that?
There is a way to put limits on that. You can whitelist or blacklist commands. I don't do any of that, and I have it in YOLO mode. It's running commands all the time. It's pretty good. I have yet to be in like a serious issue because of it. Like, I almost trust it to run the commands more than I trust myself to type them out accurately in a lot of ways. So I'm sure like a hardcore Linux person in here, which I am not.
But like
would
checkpointing wouldn't undo anything that what it did on the terminal.
No, but like, correct. So checkpointing is going to undo changes in your code base. It's not going to do changes in the larger machine. The only thing, like when I think of my day-to-day experience with this, the only thing that it's really doing on larger machines for the most part is either using command line interfaces to interact with my like database host or hosting provider, Vercel in this instance, or installing third-party libraries. And like, I never need to type like pip install. Like, it's great, you know, like, so I mean, I would say like, go for it. That's been my experience, but like, you can actually blacklist specific commands in the cursor settings under agent rules if you're more concerned about it. Yeah. Okay, so we talked through MCPs. Oh, and we have to, the last kind of major thing I want to say before we open it up a little bit more is I want to talk about test-driven design. So one more poll, who here is using test-driven design in their project today? A couple people, okay, yeah. So I hated test-driven design back in the olden days and would push against senior software developers on my various corporate teams that would be like, you should write unit tests with 80% coverage. And I'd be like, it takes fucking forever, and I fucking hate it. And now I get to have unit tests, and I don't have to write any of them. And so it's great. And so like now, it is so handy. This gets into the Git thing of like, whenever so I should introduce, what is test-driven design, right? So ultimately, it's about unit tests. It's adding unit tests into your code base is like the base level. So by adding unit tests into the code base, what happens, here, I'll just demo. Run the full test suite. And so what ends up happening is that this will run tests. And so you see here right now, this project is 507 total unit tests, right? This is testing little chunks of your code. Go ask ChatGPT to explain unit tests to you if you want to get up to speed on it. I think it's absolutely a must. If you're doing a large scale project, obviously if you're doing something small that fits in context, this might be overkill. If you're doing like a major professional grade project, I feel like it's an absolute no-brainer. Because what happens here is that my test suite runs, actually interesting, it didn't actually run the linter and type check, but it should have done that. The unit test runs, and this means whenever I'm zooming and I've got 3 tabs open and I'm changing a bunch of files simultaneously and something breaks, and I might not realize it. Let's say I'm testing the login screen and I'm doing login credentials, and finally I get the appropriate password checking working, it's right in the database, fantastic. If I don't have a unit test, I might not realize that what I just did broke some other component of the password reset process. And by forcing, and so unit tests, you can manually run it, and that's going to make it doable. And then with very little effort, you can use tools. I'm using Husky here. There's lots of things to do this, which will not allow you to merge to certain branches in your project until your tests are passing. And this will be incredibly frustrating in the short term. It is incredibly good for you in the long term. And oftentimes, so let's say this happens, the agent makes a large scale change, something breaks in the code base, then you are you're made aware of it up front, and you're like, oh, this is not done work yet. This work breaks some other part of functionality. I need to look into this. And normally it's, hey, you're a software architect, figure out why 3 of the unit tests stopped working. Okay, hey, you're a senior software developer, I want you to fix the root cause of these unit tests. And note my language there. Claude, even Claude 4 will still very cleverly be like, oh, the unit tests are broken, and the user asked me to get all the tests passing. It is very easy to add .skipped to the end of a unit test, and it will not run the unit test, and then all of the unit tests will pass. And it is like definitely,
So it's like a human, yeah.
Exactly, yes. Like a junior level developer is trying to get his story points in at the end of the sprint.
Make it green, yeah.
And I also am actually nostalgic for this in the moment when it happens, because it's like a charming thing that a large language model does that is like going to go away and is not going to be in the future. It's like something we have to deal with now in 2025, and then it's going to be gone, because like they will fix this. But for now, you do want to be clear and solve the root problem, right? And not just like remove the button from the screen or like remove the unit test whatsoever. And that gets into that whole software architect versus software developer kind of role dichotomy. Yeah.
What's the quality of the unit test? I mean, sometimes unit tests can provide coverage by entering and exiting a code block.
Yeah.
And so do they robustly actually test things, or?
I'm glad you asked that, because there's 2 things here. The short level answer is, I do think that you want to take a look at your unit tests and see what happens. And if you're not happy with it, it's easy to bump it up a notch in quality. Be like, I have a document, which is the one I reference a lot, 07. By the way, I just use numbers in front of the document, so that way I can just hit @ and then the number, and I have a lot of them memorized, and it's faster than typing out testing, because a ton of files start with testing. If you're prompting 1,000 times a day, this is like a meaningful improvement in terms of your access speed. So this is my testing document. So when it writes tests, it knows to go to 07 testing strategy. It reads through 07 testing strategy, and it knows, oh, like that sort of like very basic perfunctory checking of a function, even if it does exist, like there are some tests that are like that, it should be more rigorous, and it should try different edge cases. One of the major changes I made in this specific project have actually rolled back the complexity of it. Like got too aggressive. It like tried to make incredibly detailed, like multi-screen sequence mock-ups to like test huge chunks.
So it's
which
no longer a unit test.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, they're like user, and it tried to bring in some other libraries. I ended up being like, for me, this is a project that's under active software development. We're trying to have an alpha out by the 15th. I would rather add in that level of fidelity to testing a little bit further down the line once you have something that's like much more stable. But I want to just real quick, that actually brings up something I didn't mention, which is very important, which is asking the AI to refactor things is important. And refactor and update your documentation, which to me is like one task. It's like, I get done with a day of work. The next day, whenever I sit down at the computer, I normally start with, hey, I want you to review the changes. Let's say we were adding the password reset button. I want you to review the changes on the password reset button, make sure our documentation is up to date, review what files were created, and tidy up. Because like, in my cursor rules, I say be very judicious about making additional files, because like you will quickly get to a situation where like it's like, oh, I'm just gonna write a script to like do this like one specific thing, and it's like incredibly magical whenever it like works the first time. There's no way I would have written that script. But then you end up with like a whole directory full of like miscellaneous scripts that are not documented, that are not tied into your structure. So that's where this refactoring comes in, of like cleaning up your code base regularly, and critically making sure your documentation matches your code. Because if you do something clever, or the large language model does something clever, and fixes the password reset button, but the documentation doesn't match, you've just created a vector for gnarly bugs. Because then you're gonna have the large language model looking at 2 different things and like coin flip choosing which represents reality. And like then you get into the situation of like half the time your prompt works and half the time it doesn't, and like really, really nasty stuff. So being aggressive on refactoring is important.
Yeah, so 2 questions on that. One,
Yeah.
do you think it would make sense to have a post-commit hook that updates documentation every time a feature is pushed?
That sounds really
are you
interesting.
doing test-driven development where you have the model write the test first, it fails, and then fills? Because I've tried that, and it doesn't seem as efficient as actually building the feature first, but maybe I'm doing it incorrectly.
Totally. So I should say that that is the canonical definition of test-driven development, right? Is you write the test first before you write a single line of code, or maybe only after you write the function signature. That's like the classic way to do it. What I'm doing is really more of like encouraging, having the model write unit tests as it goes, but it is writing the code first. I'm almost using the document as the describing thing, right? The documentation describes the function, large language model writes the function, the large language model immediately writes, ideally, multiple tests to cover the function that it just wrote. I think it would be, I'd be interested to hear if you flip that around. If you told the large language model to write the test first, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work. And what was the first question you said?
Would it make sense to have a post-commit that updates documentation?
I think some people try to do script level automation in their cursor rules. You'll see this sometimes if you start looking around, where they will be like, have a task log, and every single query added to task log, and they'll put it in their cursor rules. I think that's very interesting. I haven't had level of success with it yet. I think that kind of thing of like, every time you do a commit, kick off an agent to like go do Docker view, I think would probably fit there really well. It's actually a pretty good idea. Husky is also what I'm using to do a lot of these sorts of hook things, and so it would be really interesting to kick off a background agent, which is a cursor feature that just was added like 3 weeks ago. It's the future of where we're going. Unless you're working on enterprise software, I feel like it doesn't quite make sense yet. It uses pull requests as a background agent, work inside a virtual machine, make a pull request. I think for the most of the work, at least that I'm around, going through the pull request interface is a little awkward, but all that to say, I think background agents would be like ideal for that. So I'm looking forward to hearing your class on post-git commit background agents in a week. Yeah. Okay, we talked about refactors, talked about documentation. Let's see, there's notes we've talked about. I think that's most of it. Bots love readmes, you know? It's like, they just love them. And so I just leaned into it. I used to be like, no, use the docs. And then I just gave up, and I'm like, go for it. Like, write readmes in every single directory about how to use every single directory. I think it just is because in the training set, it's like, this is the cleanest approach, it's weighted heavily. And so it's like me as a human updating to match the machine in terms of its coding preferences. So you'll see now there's like readmes all over this entire project. And you also see the agent reference them pretty often. So I think that's the thing of like really watching these models and try and figure out like how you can be working alongside them. Don't expect them to fit into your existing flow. I mean, you can do that. You can push them to fit into your flow. But I mean, to me, it's like really finding out what this like alien brain works best under, and then like giving it everything it needs to like match the needs of the alien brain.
Does it update readmes?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, put in your cursor rules, and like cursor rules is so good.
Is it storing some sort of context in those files?
I don't think it's stored, like context is within the chat thread, so I don't think it's storing that, but I think it's, and you'll see, like, let's just pick a random folder, and like components, and well, this one actually doesn't, it's not in some of these, but yeah, there is a readme, I just scrolled past it, at the bottom here, readme follow function, right? Okay, how to do follow function. I will see just like these are heavily weighted in the agent whenever the agent's looking for documentation. Is it like sees readme, it's like bam, that's like what it's going to reach for the first time. And so now I kind of default to using that. Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations on how to get the models to better follow code quality rules that you have? So I have a linter ES1 date, and then I also installed the Sonar Cube's code quality metrics to help keep it on the rails. So, but I haven't found a way to have the model follow Sonar Source's rules, which are open for everyone. So I have to, it writes the code, and then I have to refactor it, which is annoying. And I told the model, follow these rules, doesn't listen.
I mean, did you include the rules in the cursor rules?
No, just a reference. That's, to try that, I suppose.
Yeah, I would, that sounds like a situation where you could use this sort of .cursor /rules folder. And I would say I would experiment with that, of bring the whole thing in, like, I'm assuming it's like less than 1,000 pages of text or something. And like, if that's the case, I would just bring the whole thing in there and use all caps in cursor rules and be like, it is critical for our successful function to always follow these rules, and it will be a blocker issue if these rules are not followed. And you can put that at the top and the bottom and like sprinkle that liberally through, and I would bet that that would boost its accuracy. Yeah. Okay, I think we've hit on all the major points. I just want to give one very brief plug for another tool that I think a lot of devs and also non-developers would benefit from, which is repo prompt. It's less useful today than it was a year ago, but I still think it's like a bit of a hidden tool. And it's excellent actually for that ChatGPT use case we were talking about earlier, right? If you're using non-cursor, this is what I'm using a lot of my documentation iteration process I was talking about. So what this does, and this is super simple to describe, is like, okay, so let's say you want to go talk to 4.5 and you want to do it on the web because it's $2 a query if you do it in cursor, right? And so you're like, can you let me know the issues with the database architecture? And what I can do is I go over here and I can just click this file, and let's say I give it project overview and I give it database architecture and I hit copy. Now let's swing into here. What I just did when I hit copy is I just copied all of those files. First it gave it a file map, then it does file contents, it does all file context, and then at the end it ends with user instructions. So it's like a subtle thing, but it's like super, super handy if you don't want to be operating in cursor doing documentation or like writing like literally anything that you're interacting with large language models with. Repo prompt is just so good for making this giant copy paste blob. All I did was write one sentence, right, and click 2 boxes. And what I just got was 1,000 lines of context and information that I can immediately blast into context and immediately boost the quality of the output from 03 or 4.5 or something like that. Yeah, and I think that's, let's say that's the end of my kind of formal thing. And I'm just kind of curious, I know we've got a larger crowd here, but like, I'm curious as I'm saying this, are other people like, oh, I wish I knew about like this other thing? Because I think that there's like a lot of different tools out there. I'm down like one rabbit hole. I'm sure there's other kind of approach that people have been successful in. Yeah.
I have a question actually. How do you find things to try? I'm sure this is the result of a lot of experimentation. Is this from talking to other developers or just Reddit? You know, where are you finding things to try out in your setup and see how they work for you?
I would say machine learning Twitter is probably the single largest influence. But also, yeah, I think it's experimentation, right? And it's like, it is so fast to get things done that like, if you're not, you know, I'm in startup land and I can't be doing a lot of like fun side projects right now, but like I used to be doing tons of like very quick projects that you have to get all the way done and like get deployed onto the internet. That is like the best way to figure out what these techniques work for you, right? And I think different brains are gonna interact with this stuff different ways. And it is all gonna change. Like I will say like a future facing thing is like, I doubt that a year from now, I'm gonna be in a tool that shows me the code at all unless I explicitly ask for it. Like this whole project, which is 50,000 lines of code, I have written 0 lines of executing code. It is 100% prompted, right? And like, does this count as vibe coding? Like, I don't know, it's like an interesting question. I would say like for now, probably not, but it's certainly moving in that direction, right? Like
Technical
a
vibe
year ago,
coding.
what was it?
Technical vibe coding.
Yeah,
something
no,
like that.
technical vibe coding, yeah, I
something
think
like
that's a
that.
good phrase.
Yeah.
We're definitely gonna get there. I suspect that the future looks like you're in some sort of like orchestrator interface where you've got a bunch of agents, they're running autonomously, right, they're kicking off. It's probably I'm interacting with agents whose specialization is interacting with agents. And then so there's like a human interface agent, and then there's like a bunch of little technical agents that like are going off and writing product functionality, and it's all flowing up in this kind of like parallelized process to me as a user. I'm just kind of like keeping an eye on things, and there's like a live preview showing me the current output. I think we are not far from that right now. It's almost more of a UX problem and a user training problem, I think, than it is a technical problem, especially with 4. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you decide between cursor and then surface one? And then second is, are there any benchmarks you most trust for vibe coding? So I feel like the current benchmarks are more academic and not as focused on real world use cases.
Yeah, I mean, like famously, like Claude 3.7, right? Like the coders love it. It like blows away. If you look at usage from Cursor and this kind of things, people love it. But if you look at its like sweet benchmarks, it was like getting outperformed by a variety of other models, and like it was a disconnect in between our benchmarks and evals and like what is actually happening, right? So I think it's more like its taste. I think that I know that there are people that are using 4 mini and love it, and I'm not touching it ever. So I think it's like, I encourage experimentation. That's where these small projects are super handy. And like cost to switch agents mid thing is great. Also, sometimes in fact I did it here. I will take the exact same prompt, have 3 tabs, fire off the exact same prompt, a non-code editing prompt. And I will say, like in this one, it's like, I ran this across a few, where the total number of lines of code, then get the number of actual lines. And I will put it into 3 different chat contexts and have each chat context have 3 different agents or 3 different models that it's calling. And just like, it's a pretty fast way to get like a very real eval for you, right? And like, what is your project actually, because which agent do you like more? And I think once you do that a couple times, then you can get a good sense of it.
Cursor versus Windsurf?
Oh yeah, Windsurf was kind of sucky whenever Cursor first came out, and so I started using Cursor. I tried it a year ago at Jack's class, and I think it's also quite good. I'm interested. I think there's like almost philosophical things of like, what's your opinion to OpenAI, and like all of this due to their recent acquisition. And I'm almost inclined towards Cursor because it's like, I think it'll be better for the industry if OpenAI doesn't dominate the IDE side of things, but also I recognize the potential for like very fast innovation there. I also don't think that they've had a chance to optimize for post OpenAI acquisition yet. So like, I bet Windsurf 6 months from now is going to be like a very compelling offering. My limited experience is just basically, it's like they're calling the same models, they're doing similar things. But if someone had like a really compelling argument for Windsurf, I'd be totally interested in hearing it. Because like, I made this decision a year ago, and you get into this question of like, and this is a broader question of like, when do you reevaluate decisions in your stack? It used to be, you know, oh, I'm gonna do, you know, iPhone development. Like, okay, then you can like stay in that world for a long time and you'll just use Xcode. And like, now it's like, no, like every 6 months you can make a meaningful argument that like the reality has shifted so much that you are no longer sure that your tooling stack makes sense in this current age. Yeah.
To add to that, I think different pricing tiers between Cursor and Windsurf serve different users. So it's better to just see, like, evaluate on like user by user basis. What's your budget? What do you need more of? And then decide on that, because they are pretty much doing the same thing otherwise.
Yeah. And also I would encourage like, and I'll get to the question in a second. I would encourage like, don't, we're all coming from different places, particularly on financial things, right? But like, if you are, like, in my opinion, we have 1,000 days of this type of coding left, right? Like, it's literally probably 1,000 days, something like that. Now, maybe 1,000 days from now, the skills we learn in this next 1,000 days will then carry in value in the next 1,000 days. But like, optimizing for like, spend a bunch on tokens. Like, I'm spending, you know, more than $500 a month on Cursor right now, and like, totally worth it. I would easily double it if it made me even 5% more productive, because I have 1,000 days left as a senior software engineer, effectively. So like, you need to fucking build, and then not even worry about model dropdown and stuff like this. But like, there's a lot of privilege at play there, and like, I am actually getting paid to write code. So like, I think definitely you can really optimize these games too, of like, which platform's offering which deal. Yeah.
Given the shifting realities, what do you think are the best communities and channels for engineers to stay updated on how all the experimentation is going and just stay fresh on what's available?
Carpathi's Twitter account, probably. It's like, yeah, I'd say I get the best on Twitter. I'd be interested in the room of like, if other people have had communities that are getting good delta on this. For me, it's definitely Twitter is where I'm getting the most. And I'd say second is like going to cool community living places with smart people. And I think between those two, I feel pretty good about it. Yeah, but if anyone does have any like standout resources, I'm super interested. Because it's hard and it's like changing super fast.
Do you think the models are good enough today to do several hour agentic workflows where you could give it like a 10, 20 page document, detailed PRD. I know Cursor limits 25 calls, and there's a question like how to get around that.
Oh, Cursor. Oh,
That'd be
but
all
you just hit
about-
resume, and in max mode it's 200.
In what?
If you enable max mode in Cursor, so if you go down in here and you flip this guy, then you're paying it per token cost, and you can get to 200 tool calls.
Still not a lot though if you want to do several hours, right?
Yes, I mean, I'm still like, I'm looking forward to that future. For now, I'm still having 3 chat contexts. There's still a human in the loop. I'm still kind of like keeping a general eye on what's going on. I think they're getting quite good.
Yeah, so I just wonder, like, if you have combined enough of writing the test first, really detailed documentation,
Yeah.
code quality checks, etc., could you today write a detailed PRD and have it implement the feature well? And I'm playing a little with that and mixed results so far.
I think if you have really good documentation, it would do the work of a human in a few hours. Like a few hours worth of human work, it can do really quickly, right? I think that we're not quite, I think if your documentation was great, you probably could, to be honest. If you really nailed your docs up front, I don't see any reason why not. I also I really want the feedback loop of like, I want to be able to run something in the terminal. I want the agent to run something in the terminal, quickly learn the result and do feedback. If you're doing Python scripting, you have that today. It's super useful. If you're doing web dev stuff, you have to like, there's MCPs out there for this, where you give the agent access to a browser and things. I have yet to have success with those tools, but if you look on YouTube, there are clearly people that are like pushing on this, and it's getting that feedback loop that I think is probably the single largest need from my side. Yeah. Okay, any final closing questions? I think otherwise we're about out of time here. Awesome. Thanks so much for coming. Looking forward to telling you completely different things in a year.
I'd just like to plug, I'm hosting a session Friday at 1:30 where some of the stuff you talked about, we're just gonna like walk through and